and I'm one-to-one with my friend and former colleague, Michael Lienau. Michael Lienau is based in the Seattle. You're in Seattle, aren't you, Mike?
That's correct. Yeah,
That,
it's north of Seattle.
okay. Well, this is a significant day today because it was 40 years ago this month that Mike was a photojournalist shooting a documentary on Mount Saint Helens. It had just erupted, and he was up there on the ground with a camera crew, and they were shooting video and for a documentary, and then the mountain erupted again, and Mike and his companions were missing and presumed dead for about 4 days up there. And fortunately, Mike was discovered. He lost all his hair, if I'm not mistaken. But Mike and I used to work together when I was a reporter and was assigned to stories in the Pacific Northwest. So Mike was our photog out there, and I got to know Mike on a lot of different shoots. And he shared his story, and so I'm excited to talk to you, Mike, about the experience that you had out there, and we're going to be able to show a clip of what happened, but give me a sense first of all of just what it was like. I mean, you really thought you were going to die, right?
Yeah, that's right, John. It's great to see you again. So it's hard to believe it's been 40 years since those 4 days that changed my life at Mount Saint Helens in May of 1980. And what had happened was early in April, there was signs of something potentially volcanic happening at Mount Saint Helens. This is just the weather section of our local newspaper. But then the story began to develop, and Mount Saint Helens began to bulge and began to build pressure that looked like it was going to lead to something volcanic. But this was pretty early science for scientists in those days, and they could only observe what they were watching at the moment and had very little tools to actually be able to predict what was possibly going to happen. So I found myself really drawn to the drama that was slowly unplaying there. It actually happened quite April until May 18th, when the mountain erupted violently. There was a catastrophic collapse of the north flank that then got both a horizontal and vertical eruption. The horizontal eruption is what caused all the devastation, 256 square miles of devastation. And the okay, John, does that keep blanking out on us there? Or?
Yeah, what I'm going to do, Mike, is I'm going to roll some video of a documentary that was shot and includes a lot of your video from the experience. And while that's rolling, I'm thinking that what might be a good idea is for you to bail and then link back in, and that'll probably make it a better connection. So this will be about a 4-minute clip from this documentary, and while we're watching that, you should be able to log off and log back on again, and I promise I'll let you back into the studio.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, here I'm going to roll this from your documentary.
So this footage actually begins once we go in there. Do you want me to lead up to that point, John?
Uh-huh.
So this was what Mount Saint Helens looked like in the aftermath of the big eruption. Mm-hmm. That big eruption totally destroyed 256 square miles, and it killed 57 people. They were pretty much pulverized by this hurricane force of volcanic pulverized and force of the eruption, and all these trees, the entire beautiful Northwest forest, lay flat by this volcanic eruption. Mm-hmm. I think that caught a lot of people off guard, because we were all thinking in our mind that St. Helens was going to erupt just vertically, straight up into the atmosphere, but we had both. The force of blast went out horizontally and vertically the vertical ash cloud reached all the way into the stratosphere, 80,000 feet.
Wow.
And the ash cloud, eventually, about a week later, ash was falling in Boston, Massachusetts. An entire year later, there was ash still falling on the other side of Mount St. Helens. It had actually encircled the entire world.
Oh, that's incredible.
So by the grace of God, I wasn't there for that eruption.
Wow.
But I was in Oregon, and I jumped in my car. We headed north immediately, started filming the devastation around the mountain. And then I called a production company in Seattle that I knew was doing a film about Mount St. Helens. And I asked them if they needed any help. And they said, yes, we need somebody to follow the ash cloud. So my first assignment was to get in a helicopter and follow the black ash cloud that was now going across country. And nobody knew what that meant. But as the helicopter flew into the ash cloud, it made us kind of nervous. So the pilot landed in a restaurant parking lot right on the Columbia River in Vantage, Washington. And we looked up and we just saw the sky continue this broiling cloud of ash over us. And that cloud actually blanketed the entire sun, and it went black on us.
Wow. So Mike, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a little clip from this the fire below, and there'll be audio narration and all that, and it'll show a pretty good. It'll give, I think, our viewers a good maybe 4-minute sense of, with narration, not your narration, but from the documentary of.
Okay.
Of what it was like for you, and then maybe you'll be able to, come back on to. I think we have a pretty good connection with you right now, but let's just roll this video and let's listen to the actual narration here. Wow. That's very powerful, Mike. Um, Tell me, give me a sense of how you're different now. I mean, that was 40 years ago, the beginning of your life. You were 20 years old. What's happened since then? What do you like now?
Yeah, that was I was on my way to go to film school and go and find my career in Hollywood somehow. And I did this little detour to Mount Saint Helens, thinking that filming that would help my career. But we went in for just a 4-hour photo journey to document from the ground what it looked like. But when our compasses went berserk, we got lost, disoriented. When we were forced to spend the night, the volcano erupted in the second largest eruption. And during all that time, of course, we were frightened by it all. But I was frightened not because of the volcano, but because I grew up in a Christian home. We went to church, went to Sunday school, but I really hadn't thought much about my own faith. And what really scared me more than the volcano was not being able to answer the question that if I died there that day, would I go to heaven and hell? Because I believed in heaven and hell going to church, but I never really gave it much thought. Not at 20 years old. I had my whole life ahead of me. Mm. So not being able to answer that question scared me so much that I started to seek that in my own heart. And I had this little pocket Bible that my father had given me, and I was looking for something that would comfort me in this time of distress. And I opened up to Romans, and it said, "For your sake, we are considered as sheep to be slaughtered all the day long." That was not very encouraging. That wasn't what I was looking for. I was hoping for, you will be delivered in your day of disaster.
Right.
But then I read on, and as I read on, it said, "In nothing in all of creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord." I read that, and being in the midst of all creation turned upside down, I had this peace. I had this peace that no matter what happened to me, that I was in God's hands now, and that I believed. I believed in a new way, not just because we did that as a family, as went to church, whatever. But now it was my own faith, because I knew I needed to settle that part of my life with God now sooner than later in my life. And I think it really humbled me, and it really did the course of my life. Even all the decisions I've made since then have been based on that promise that I made to God when I was 20 years old, that I'll serve Him for the rest of my life if He got us out of that mess that we found ourselves in. Yeah. And so, just that humbling experience has really changed me.
Well, and so now, I mean, you have your own production company, and you've really spent your life, in a sense, being a student of volcanoes and earthquakes and things like that. I'm going to show just a little bit, because you also took some video of the Mount Kilauea and that eruption, which was an entirely different situation. Let me see if I can pull this up and roll on that. And I'm going to probably need to pot down the audio. Well, how did it feel to be shooting, the whole Kilauea experience, having had the Mount St. Helens experience? Were you sort of wondering, uh-oh, I've done it again, or what?
Well, yeah, I had an intense interest in learning all I could about what happened to us. Why did 57 people die? How did that catch us off guard? And so I started following the scientists as they went out to discover what was fueling Mount St. Helens to make it erupt so large. And people were asking me the question, what about Mount Rainier? What about Mount Baker, Glacier Peak, all these other volcanoes, dozens of active volcanoes on the U.S. West Coast? Actually, the United States is one of the most volcanically active nations in the world. We have 161 active volcanoes. For a lot of people, especially along the Pacific Ring of Fire and in Hawaii, it's right in the dark. And so it's important for us to learn and understand these geologic hazards, because it's actually just part of what Earth does. But when these things erupt, they become disasters. They affect our infrastructure or affect people. So anyways, I became interested. I produced a film called Fire Mountains of the West about all the Cascade volcanoes. And while I was doing that film, I met a volcanologist who was changing his study from volcanoes to earthquakes. I thought, well, that's interesting. Why are you talking about earthquakes? They don't seem to have anything to do with volcanoes. But actually, the process that fueled Mount St. Helens also triggers the largest earthquakes on Earth. So I went off my camera following these scientists. It was like a detective story, uncovering the truth behind what happened to us at Mount St. Helens. Mm-hmm. So I produced a film called Cascadia, the Hidden Fire. And I want to call it the Hidden Fire because it has this tie to Mount St. Helens and volcanoes, yet it triggers magnitude 9 earthquakes. So in 2004, Boxing Day was a earthquake, 9.2 earthquake, that shook the Indian Ocean Sumatra region, and it killed 300,000 people. And people were asking the question, could this ever happen in America? And here I had just finished a film, released nationally on PBS, and PBS reran it right after that earthquake event, and it became one of the highest rated programs in history on Science Night, because people were intensely interested in these large volcanic and earthquake type of disasters. So about 7-8 years ago, I moved my family to Hawaii to help some friends that were developing some film studios there. And while I couldn't stay away from Kilauea, the most active volcano on the Earth, it had started erupting in 1983, just 3 years after Mount St. Helens. And when I went up to Mount St. Helens, I thought I was going to see volcanic lava. But guess what? We never did. It was a gray volcano. All we saw was ash, pulverized magma that went into the atmosphere and became ash. So it wasn't until 2012 that I was actually able to film my first active lava flow. And then I intensely watched as the lava lake formed and different eruptions happened over the years that I was there, leading up to a catastrophic collapse of the magma lake in Kilauea that then sent the lava flowing down the rift zone into an area called Leilani Estates, where 700 homes were destroyed over the next several weeks. Oddly enough, May 18th has been a marking date. 1924 was the largest eruption at Kilauea. It was an explosive eruption. 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted. May 18th, 2018, there was a large explosive eruption at Kilauea. So it was just these interesting, ironic things that happened in my life, that I happened to be in Hawaii when Kilauea was erupting. We had friends that actually lost homes in that area, and so we were able to go in and document that. And I have a lot of that footage on my website. It's quite dramatic. It's quite different from Mount St. Helens. The lava fountains we were able to document that are as high as the Statue of Liberty, and massive lava flows going down and destroying this. I mean, right in people's backyards. We had friends these giant cracks opened up. They were 20 feet wide, 100 feet deep into the ground, steaming, hot steam coming out of it. Eventually, lava started bubbling up and overflowing onto their land. So yeah, we've learned a lot since 1980. You know, some of the same scientists that were at Mount Saint Helen in 1980 were now at Kilauea.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of an interesting journey for me to see, you know, the advancement in volcano science since then.
And of course, as interesting as it is in terms of volcanoes and earthquakes, we're right in the middle of a pandemic now, which is another worldwide crisis. Is there any kind of a takeaway from your experience covering volcanoes to the current situation that we're in with this pandemic? Are there any parallels, any lessons that you can take from one and apply them to what we're going through now?
Yes, absolutely, John. You know, my life became all about learning, understanding about these disasters and how quickly they can come and change our lives. So, you know, not only did I learn about volcanoes, but I learned about earthquakes and tsunamis and how those events can literally change our lives. And so after we released the film about earthquakes in the Northwest, people were saying, what's the use? We're all going to die. But that wasn't the message we wanted people to get. We wanted them to understand the information, the scientific information that's out there, so that they could prepare. So I started preparing my family for a potential earthquake. It looked like we were in the time frame of when an earthquake could happen. So we did a film called Personal Survival Kit. What you need to know to prepare for earthquakes. Well, it just happened that in that earthquake kit, we had N95 masks, we had hand sanitizer, we had medical gloves and leather work gloves, because in an earthquake, you're not going to have fresh water. You're going to need to sanitize your hands. You're going to have a lot of debris. You want to protect your lungs, and you want to also protect your hands. So we discovered that preparing for a worst case earthquake, you're actually preparing for almost any kind of disaster. Another really interesting case in point was that New York City, they discovered earthquake faults that can trigger magnitude 5.5 earthquakes today in Manhattan. And they put together an earthquake plan for what to do with all the debris from unreinforced masonry buildings, and how after an earthquake event, the streets are going to be packed full of debris. So they put together a plan. After 9/11, they pulled out that earthquake plan to clear the debris from the terrorist attacks in New York City. But it was because they had planned for an earthquake that they had a plan for a terrorist attack. And there's a lot of other parallels to that. Because of my interest in helping people prepare for disasters, we were asked to do a film about preparing for pandemics 11 years ago.
Really?
So this is during the swine flu, the avian bird flu, and people were talking about pandemics and how someday we're going to have a pandemic. It wasn't a question of will we have a pandemic, it was a question of when we have a pandemic. Well, the 11 years went by. We have a short memory span. And 10 years went by, and today we're experiencing a pandemic. And because we did this film, our family, we knew what a pandemic was. We had supplies on hand. I mean, our supplies were mainly for an earthquake, but we had extra supplies, so we didn't have to rush to the store and try to stock up on items. We already had items in hand. And we're able to take a much more practical approach. So for me, disaster preparedness is just being practical. It's being practical, being informed, and then having your supplies on hand. And then I think it helps us even emotionally and spiritually to have that preparedness mindset.
Well, and that's
when things happen. Because our life can happen without any warning, just like Mount Saint Helens
Exactly.
did for
Well,
me.
and that's what I want to get to, because it's one thing to be prepared physically, but I think we're already seeing that there's a big emotional reaction that people are having as well. I mean, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of concern, understandable concern about our future and health and what's life going to be like on the other side, and economic catastrophe and so on. So is there an emotional, spiritual takeaway in a practical sense, not doctrinaire, but in a practical sense, in terms of how one lives their life with these swords of Damocles hanging over us? How do we go forward with this kind of world that we live in, where anything can happen that can wipe us out?
That's right, John. And for me, and I think for all of us, we get certain wake-up calls in our lives. So for me, Mount St. Helens was a wake-up call, and I did not hit the snooze alarm. I actually woke up, and I have been intensely interested in these subjects since then. And I think, different people react differently. Sometimes we get a wake-up call and we hit the snooze alarm, we forget about things and just want to get our lives back to normal. But I hope that for many people, this pandemic will be a wake-up call for them, that it will help them to evaluate their life like I did on Mount St. Helens, that if something was to happen to me, am I ready spiritually? Am I ready to, really settle that issue? Because I think for all of us, we know that there is another place, that God has put eternity in our hearts, and that we search for that. I did at Mount St. Helens. I knew that there was this isn't what there is. There is another realm, mm-hmm. and that I really believe in the Bible and what it says, and I believe, God supernaturally revealed himself to me at Mount St. Helens. Mm. And I think all of us, we need to hear those wake-up calls. Yeah. There's definitely a wake-up call on our nation, on the world, and on us individually that we all need to respond to at this time.
Well, and I think the thing that resonates with me is that I've known you for almost 40 years. And you're a consummate professional. We had a great working relationship. And I think what really makes sense is that, that situation, that life and death situation on Mount St. Helens was a life-changing experience for you. And we're looking now back on it 40 years later. And so you've got that, that life perspective. You really did take that seriously and applied those lessons to your life, so that you have been able to make a really solid, constructive contribution, to society, your family, and so on. I wish we had more time. You and I had plenty of time when we were, on the road together. But this has been really fascinating, and I'm so glad that you have been able to document these things about your life and share them with us today. Any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
Well, thanks for the time today, John. Great to see you and talk about these issues. Yeah, I just. I don't know. I just have this has caused me to really think about my life last 40 years, and I just feel blessed. Everything that's happened to me since those 4 days that changed my life. My wife, my 9 kids. We have 4 biological, 5 adopted kids. Now we have 4 grandchildren, another one on the way. So I am just feeling so blessed. To looking back now 40 years, and I'm so thankful that actually happened to me, because it just shifted my whole life. It shifted my whole direction and everything. And we all have problems. We all have challenges that we face, but having some good foundations really help us through those hard times too.
Well said. We've been speaking with Michael Lienau, photojournalist, documentarian, founder of Global Net Productions, and an all-round nice guy. And it's good to catch up with you again, Mike. I'm John DeDakis. You've been one-to-one with me, and I've been one-to-one with Mike Lienau. I'll see you next time.